Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we are going to be starting something new that is old, and old that is new, and we're going to be returning back to the inner territory of the spirit, and we're going to focus on calmness. We're going to focus on the roots of calmness, the things that detract from calmness, the goal of calmness, the tools that help bring us towards calmness, the various moods that calmness emerges out of, and the various triggers that take us out of the space of cultivating calmness, the role that calmness plays in the fabric of reality, as well as moving from exile into redemption. But most significantly, while touching upon all of those things, we're also going to be trying to focus on the experience of calmness and the desire and the need to cultivate calmness and to live within calmness. So, Be'ezras Hashem, what we're going to do today is we're going to introduce the inner world of calmness. We're going to introduce the role that menucha plays in a person's life, that menuchas hanefesh plays in the world, and the work that a person needs to put in order to arrive at that territory. Now, to begin with, being that it's Hanukkah, and Hanukkah is a hitznotzitzos, it's a sparking of the Or Haganus, of that concealed light that was prior to existence. It was the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealing his infinitude prior to existence. And the miracle of that infinite light remaining even after existence takes place. That's the secret of the Or Haganus. Like we say daily, we say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was one prior to the creation of the world, and he's one after the creation of the world. Meaning to say that the creation of the world, which is obviously a movement away from the unity that preceded the creation of the world, is in fact miraculously going to continue to be present in the very same way after the creation of the world. That the separation of the creation of the world and all of the myriad details that come along with that do not detract, from the expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinitude before creation, as well as HaKadosh Baruch Hu's expression of infinitude after creation. But the way that that's possible is only when we acknowledge that it's impossible. Because prior to the creation of the world, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was truly infinite. There was no separation, there was no distinction, there was no measurement. After the creation of the world, there's a halal, there's pratim, there's details, there's separations, there's experiences, there's changes. And so instead of looking at the secret of unity as being the self-same unity before the creation of the world and after the creation of the world, what we now have to grapple with is that we have a distinction, a great distinction, an infinite distinction between before creation and after creation, and somehow, some way, both are expressive. Both reveal the very same Achdus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means that the Achdus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is built of more than just the Achdus of before the creation of the world, but it also contains within itself the Achdus of after the creation of the world, the Yichud Ilah and the Yichud Tata, which forces us to reconceive our relationship with infinitude, which forces us to come to terms with the fact that all that we conceive of as the opposite of unity is in truth still within the realm of unity, which then shifts our experience from trying to get back to unity from a place of disunity, and it reorients us to trying to draw down unity and reveal the unity that always already exists wherever we find ourselves. This is the secret of HaKadosh Baruch Hu being Echad before the creation of the world, as well as being Echad after the creation of the world. But because this revelation can't be revealed in a clear way, because the clear revelation of this would be a reversion back to the infinitude of prior to the creation of the world, therefore, the reality of the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu after the creation of the world is grasping the unity by way of concealment, grasping HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the lens of his hastara, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu conceals himself in order to reveal this new element of himself, Kaviyachol, to show and magnify the power of his unity. But by definition, that unity can no longer operate in the same halachos of revelation as it existed prior to the creation of the world, which comes from the language of Ha'elem. And therefore, now, after the creation of the world, what's Chal is a second form of grasping HaKadosh Baruch Hu in and through the Ha'alama itself, in and through the creation of the world, in and through the Bria, in and through the Gvul. And so how does one create a bridge? How does HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveal a bridge, the impossible bridge between the infinitude prior to the creation of the world, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinity negated all possibility of separation, and all separation was seen as just a figment of imagination, and there's a return at every moment back to the silent unity of all things prior to distinction, devoid of any concern or attachment. And the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that's going to exist after the creation of the world, which is concealed, where we're going to see all types of difference. The impossible bridge that needs to be built between those two can't be fully revealed. And therefore, it's going to be an element of concealment. But how do you have the revelation of Hashem's unity in a way that it expresses itself in concealment? And so this is what's referred to as the Or Haganus, the concealed light. The light, the Or Ein Sof that existed prior to the creation of the world, does not get removed through the creation of the world. The Tzimtzum is not an actual removal of that light, as we know. God forbid. There is no actual removal of the light. The ore always leaves a roshem. There's always the residual oil that rests even after the flame of the candle goes out. And so when we come to realize that the absence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's unity is never an actual absence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's unity. The apparent tzimtzum of the ore is never an actual removal of the ore. So then we have to enter into a new sugya of genizas ha'or, of a concealment of the light. Now, concealment and revelation is very different than removal and re-entry. Removal and re-entry implies an actual removal and a departure of that original light that saturated all things of infinitude. It was removed, it congealed into a place of the opposite of light, and now our job is to draw and reveal and bring more light from outside into that place. Now, that's a terrifying way to look at the world, because what that means is that when a person, prior to drawing light into that place, then they're operating in a place that's devoid of light, God forbid, which is not only a theoretical impossibility, but it's also terrifying and existentially damning experience. And so what Hasidus does and what Pnimius HaTorah does and what the Torah does is reveal to us that it's not a question of removal and re-entry to this point that there was an actual absence, but rather it's a he'elem and a giloi. It's a concealment and a revelation. The distinction between concealment and revelation and absence and re-entry is that in concealment and revelation, nothing ever actually goes away. It simply gets covered over. It simply undergoes a certain diminution, which removes it from being the ever-present nature of the reality, and it goes into a certain type of hibernation. It descends back into the background. It retreats into the very core and fabric of reality. It's not that it's ever absent, it just means that the volume has been lowered and the contrast has been dimmed to the degree that it's no longer abundantly apparent in the face of an individual that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light is everywhere and everything at every moment. And so this Or Haganuz is the same light that existed prior to the creation of the world, where the individual was able to see from one edge of the world to the other because everything was revealed to be part and parcel of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's unity. And it goes through a process of concealment where it doesn't get removed from reality, it gets baked deeper into reality. It becomes the very fabric of reality, becomes the foundation of reality. And like any other foundation, which is the basis upon which something stands, it seems like it's absolutely nothing because it's so basic and fundamental to the existence. And so the Or Haganuz is not that the Or is gone, God forbid, but that the Or is always still there. And it's our job to re-access that light. And that's the secret of retrieving the Or Haganuz, retrieving that light of unity that existed prior to separation and contrast, and uncovering the remainder, the irreducible trace of that light of unity as an Or Haganuz. It's still called Or Haganuz. It doesn't mean that that Or Haganuz is fully revealed. Even when it's revealed, it still remains an aspect of concealment because the light is too great to be fully revealed until HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides to fully reveal it again. And until then, what we have to understand is that it's not that the light was there and then it's concealed as if it's removed. It's still there, but it's there in the framework of concealment, which means that achin ata kelmastater, that I learned to relate to Hastara and revealed that Hastara is also an expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Or Haganuz is still Ganuz, but we gain access into the Or Haganuz. This is the secret of the Neiros Hanukkah, where we become aware of the reality of the Or Haganuz, but it has to remain concealed, meaning it can't be utilized, it can't be manipulated, it can't be manufactured, and it can't fall under the hands of the technological demand to utilize it for my betterment. Shimush means to manipulate it and to draw it into my own persona and to objectify it and make it a commodity. But all we can do is look at it. The Or Haganuz must remain concealed, but the wisdom and the illumination that comes with the knowledge and the acknowledgement of Or Haganuz is that we now know that the Geniza and what appears to be concealed is in and of itself the Or. The Or Haganuz reveals itself just like the secret reveals itself without stopping to be a secret, without stopping to be concealed, which is that we are aware of it now. We can't fully laugh and reveal the punchline of the joke because the punchline of the joke, which is that the Or has never left and it's always been there, is not yet fully revealed. It's still concealed, but we can grin at the joke. We can learn to smile with the knowledge that, wow, there's an amazing joke being told here that's about to be revealed, and I am beginning to understand it even prior to the punchline. I know that there is an Or Haganuz here. It's still Begeniza, it's still concealed, which is somewhere in between complete revelation and complete concealment. It's the revelation of concealment. And then I begin to see the shine that comes out of that Or HaGanuz. And this secret is revealed over Hanukkah, that we have the ability to gain access to that hidden light, to that hidden shine of infinitude, to that hidden shine of things being the way that they are meant to be in their ideal form, in spite of the fact that we continue to live in a reality where things do not operate in their ideal form, where there's a choshech that's machasa the aretz, and that there's a darkness and a concealment, but nevertheless, within the reality of the world, we're able to uncover and rekindle and touch and not to be mishamish in it, but to touch through vision, to touch through the mind's eye, the ability to know that there's an Or HaGanuz. And this Or HaGanuz, this secret of the Or HaGanuz, what it means on a practical level is, as the Ramchal describes, and also the Alter of Slobodka describes this. We've discussed this before. It was written in a mimer from the Alter of Slobodka in Or HaTzafon, but it was such a radical notion that the Talmidim of the Alter of Slobodka really felt that it was difficult to conceive of the fact that the Alter actually wrote this mimer. It's a mimer in Or HaTzafon in Parshas Bereshis, based on Maisa Bereshis. It's called Oilamecha Tira B'Chayecha. Now, when a person learns Chassidus and a person learns Pnimis Torah, this is a code word. This notion of Oilamecha Tira B'Chayecha is a code word that Chachamim used, that Chazal used, that the Tzaddikim used to convey the deepest secrets of what Pnimiyas Torah is actually coming to convey to an individual. But the way that the Ramchal and the Alter of Slobodka, and very possibly the Alter of Slobodka based on the Ramchal and Adir Bamarom, explain is as follows, that there are two realities that operate simultaneously. There is the reality of how things were prior to things falling apart, and there is the reality of things after they have fallen apart. There is the reality of the world prior to creation, and there is the reality of the world after creation. These are not two stages in a durational pattern where one exists and then one ceases to exist so that the other can become a stage of existence now, but rather they are a simultaneous pulsation of two coexisting moments that ascend beyond the time-space continuum that allow us to conceive of them both operating at once. That prior to the creation of the world and after the creation of the world, prior to concealment and after concealment, those are two stages that are accessible at the very same moment to an individual. Rav Dessler describes this very powerfully in Chelek Hey in Michtav Me'Eliyahu, that when Chazal say that the world is composed of either the sword or the book, that HaSefer v'HaSayif yardu kruchim biachad, that the book and the sword descended down into the world interwoven together. What Rav Dessler says is that be'emes, there's only one option available to a person. There are always two ways of looking at the world, but it is going to be the way that I choose to see the moment that is going to be magdir and create the mitzias of that moment. So that I can always either look at the world through the lens of the sword, which is a disconnection, or through the lens of the book, which is the perspective of connection. Two options descend down into the world. Two options remain ever present in front of me, either before concealment or after concealment, before creation or after creation, prior to Tzimtzum and after Tzimtzum. Those two options remain open in front of me, and it is up to me to choose how to orient myself to it. So what that means is that if both options operate simultaneously, then every stage, even if it's a stage that's been lost, remains accessible in spite of the fact that according to the revealed nature of things, it's lost. This is very much connected to the depths of Pnimis Torah, especially the Torah's Chacham, as the Rebbe is masbir to us, which is the secret of Ein Siluk Moichin La'olam, that nothing is ever lost, that everything remains. But what the Ramchal and the Alter of Slobodka basically point out, based on this principle, is that just as Adam Harishon existed prior to being kicked out of Gan Eden, and exists after being kicked out of Gan Eden, that just as each person has a chelik of Gan Eden and an Olam Haba, and a chelik of this world and an Olam Hazeh, so too a person has access to their chelik of Olam Haba at any moment they so choose. Because if the chelik of Olam Haba, the chelik of being in Gan Eden prior to being kicked out of Gan Eden, the chelik of prior to concealment, the chelik of prior to the creation of the world, the chelik of prior to the fall, that exists in real time within our accessibility and within our experience. And in spite of the fact that we all live within the post-lapsarian stage of being kicked out of Gan Eden, of having fallen, of being stuck within the concealment, of being within a world of concealment, nevertheless, the opportunity to live in a state of prior to all of those degradations remains accessible to those who are willing to walk the path of Avodas Hashem. that with the refinement of mind and the Mesilas Yesharim and the path that leads a person directly towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, one can come to live their life as if they've never actually left Gan Eden. One can live their life in their minds as if they've never actually had a tzimtzum. One can live their lives as if, as the tzaddikim of Lubavitch said, that by Rashbi and by the true tzaddikim, the Beis HaMikdash was never actually destroyed. It was avada destroyed, but for the tzaddikim, there's an access point in the mind, and for all of us, Amir Kulam tzaddikim, there's an access point within the mind that we can retreat back into the place prior to the fall, where we can access that place in our mind prior to the Chet of the Eitzadas, and we can live a life of Gan Eden Mamish. Now, again, it's very delicate, as the Rebbe points out over and over and over again. It doesn't mean that once I access Gan Eden of my life, that I'm no longer in the Olam Haza of my life. It's Shtayim Shu Echad. It's both at the same point. It's infusing the light of Oilamecha Tira B'chayecha, of Olam Haba, of prior to the Chet of Adam Arishon, in the time of after the Chet of Adam Arishon. It's drawing down the light of prior to the Chet into after the Chet. It's drawing down the light of prior to the Tzimtzum into the Tzimtzum itself. It's never retreating and running away and escaping into the world of prior to the Tzimtzum or running back to Gan Eden to deny the reality of living outside of Gan Eden. That is an escapism. The goal is to draw the light of Gan Eden, which exists perpetually within my mind, and the Nahar Hayotzah Mi Eden. The Nahar Hayotzah Mi Eden, as we're going to discuss, is the same function as the Or HaGanuz. It's the connectivity between the world prior to the Chet of Adam Arishon and the world after the Chet of Adam Arishon. And I can live with that irrigating river that floats into my mind from Gan Eden as I continue to exist in Olam Haza with all of the Sveikos and all of the Hastara that exists, to the point that I am living my world in my days. I am drinking from the fountain of the waters of Gan Eden, from that river that flows forth, from that secret of Oineg, of the Eden Nahar Gan, that transformation of the inside into the outside, where I'm still outside, but I'm still benefiting from the light of the inside, that remains accessible to us. That's the secret of Oilamecha Tira B'chayecha, that with the proper alignment and attunement of self to the inner neshama and to the movement away from the stuckness of the anxiety of time and the claustrophobia of space within the mind, and through hisbodedus and through davening and through silence, a person can come to a place of mamish living in Gan Eden, even though they're living in Olam Haza and they're walking around with all of the distortions and the vicissitudes of what it means to be a human being in this world. That's the access point of the Or HaGanuz. To taste of the Or HaGanuz means to live Olam Haba in Olam Haza, even though it's not Olam Haba yet. It's Kimei HaShamayim Al Haaretz, like the days of heaven on earth themselves. This is the secret of the Or HaGanuz that's being mislabish Lamata Me'asar Tvachim, in the lowest place. Now, for our purposes, what we're going to look at as the condition, what was the condition? Right? We want to access Gan Eden again. We want to live Gan Eden in our days. We want to draw the air of Gan Eden into the polluted air of this world. We want to draw the light back into the darkness to illuminate the darkness itself. What is it that we want to gain access to? Now, any sugya in the neshama, any aspect of the self, any emotion, whether it's associated with one of the 10 spheros explicitly, or whether it's an offroot or an offshoot of one of the emotional kind of quadrants within the self, each and every one of the human experiences and the vicissitudes and the shifts and the ever-changing colors that we go through in our human experience, especially emotionally, can be found within the experience of Gan Eden and its counterpart, and the descent away from that experience and the entry into the difficult cognitive distortions that seem to take us away from that experience, and what we need to work through in order to return back to that Gan Eden experience, can be found in the Torah after Gan Eden. That Gan Eden and after Gan Eden, the first prakim of Parshas Bereshis, which discuss this process of the Cheder Tzadas and the rivers and the transformation between the inside and the outside and the outside and the inside, they represent and they contain the full gamut of possible human experience and the transition from calmness or the positive experience into the opposite, and the movement back from the opposite of the positive experience back to the positive experience. And so what we're going to focus on in particular now, as the tzaddikim have pointed out, is the nature of menucha, the nature of calmness that existed prior to the departure and being kicked out of Gan Eden, and the availability of calmness that exists after we leave Gan Eden, and the accessibility to retrieve that secret of calmness from before being kicked out of Gan Eden, and to draw it down into our lives right now, even though we're prior to the re-entry back into Gan Eden. That is the hitznoitzitzis. That is us drinking from the river that flows forth from Gan Eden. That is us illuminating our minds with the Or HaGanuz that gives us a taste of that which will be revealed in the future prior to its actual revelation, giving us a taste of Mashiach even prior to the arrival of Mashiach, which is the secret of eating the food of Shabbos on Erev Shabbos. And so we're going to look at calmness. We're going to look at menucha. Now, the shirish of menucha, What the tzaddikim point out, the shirish of menucha is non-movement. Tenua, movement, transition, spacing, is the opposite of menucha. Menucha represents a stillness. Menucha represents a non-movement. It represents something that is situated and sturdily in place without any need to deviate from its position to the left, to the right, up or down. Movement implies a desire to either move from the place that I'm at or to gain ground above and beyond where I'm at the moment. And that desire towards movement is always a movement that is inspired by a certain element of deficiency. As Rabbi Nachman says, the purpose of movement is to gain something that I don't have accessible to me right now. And in truth, if a person were to have an orientation towards the fullness and the wholeness that exists in any moment, says Rabbi Nachman, they would never really desire to move. Moving, tnua, picking oneself up from one moment and placing oneself down in the next moment for the sake of picking oneself up again, all of that is rooted in the desire to shift from where I am at right now to where I would like to be, or back from where I'm at right now to where I want it to be. That desire towards movement, that desire towards shifting, that desire towards change is the thing that displaces us from ourselves, is the very thing that takes us out of Gan Eden. Now, it is obviously an adaptation of how to function outside of Gan Eden, as we're going to see, but nevertheless, the opposite of the experience of Gan Eden is the opposite of tenua, of movement, of going here and there, running everywhere. It's the 6 days of the week, it's the transitions and the changes that take place between me and myself, me and my other, me and the world on a given basis. It is the shifts in relationships, the shifts in perspective, the shifts in self-esteem, the ups and the downs that a person experiences on a regular basis. This tnuas hanefesh, this movement of the self, this unstoppable movement of the self, this never not moving aspect of the mind that is perpetually looking for one thing instead of the other thing and the other thing instead of this thing, is rooted in the departure of Adam Harishon from Gan Eden. We entered into a world of tnua, and the tnua of the machshava and the desire to be here, to be elsewhere, to live in the curse of Cain, which is that wherever I am, I'm not okay. And it's the world of living in the opposite of menucha. Menucha is stillness. Menucha is the recognition that everything is here right now. It is a groundedness, as we see in the Torah, as we're going to see, that menucha is very often associated with Eretz Yisrael, the notion of a place, the notion of arriving at a place, finally, the nature of arrival, the nature of believing that there is a point to arrive at, and the place, the source of all place is Gan Eden. So this notion that there is a place that I can finally arrive at, where I can fully be calm, is the secret of Menucha, the secret of Eretz Yisrael, where Rabbi Nachman was able to say, is Kol Makom Shani Holech, Ani Holech Rak LaEretz Yisrael, that there's a secret of Menucha, there's a secret of the Beis HaMikdash. That is the experience of before being kicked out of Gan Eden, where Adam Harishon was able to see min ha'olam va'ad ha'olam. Yes, there were shifts and changes, as we're going to see, because Adam Harishon was tasked with la'avda u'lashamra, to guard and to cultivate, both which imply a certain necessity of movement. And so we're not going to be able to say that it's the absence of actual movement, which is the secret of Menucha, because in Gan Eden there was still movement itself. But what we're going to see is that there is a distinction between how we look at the necessity of movement and change and shift in our lives between the Gan before being kicked out of Gan Eden, where movement, in spite of the fact that it's movement, doesn't have to take me away from Menucha, and the movement, the notion of change and shift that exists after being kicked out of Gan Eden, where I can no longer live with that simultaneity of movement and calmness. Prior to being kicked out of Gan Eden, movement and the tnua of Adam Arishon was not seen as an opposition to Menucha. There was a secret of Menucha within movement and within shifting itself. There was a desire to move without feeling that I'm moving because I'm missing something, but rather from a place of fullness that I want more of what I have already, versus the experience of movement and change that exists after Gan Eden, where it's nearly impossible for a person to draw the light of Menucha, which is the self-same comfort of stillness and not needing to move anywhere, into the actual shifts. So we live a life of shifts and tenua. This is identified, this breakdown between before being kicked out of Gan Eden, which is the calmness and being kicked out of Gan Eden, which is the chaos and the opposite of Menucha, this is very much associated with the secret of the 6 days of the week and Shabbos. Shabbos is compared to the secret of Olam Haba, to the secret of Menucha, to the Tam of Gan Eden. The secret of Shabbos is Menucha. Now, as we're going to learn throughout this series of Shirim, we're going to have very difficult time pinning down exactly the definitive explanation of it, Menucha, because each and every person is going to have their own understanding of the nature of Menucha. And that in and of itself is the secret of Menucha, that each and every person has their own orientation to Menucha. But suffice it to say that Shabbos itself is Menucha, that Maha Olam Chaser, what was the world missing prior to the emergence of Shabbos? It wasn't missing anything. Everything was contained, everything was built, everything was ready. But what it was missing was the wholeness, the secret of saturation that infuses every detail of all of creation with its purpose. And what is that purpose? That purpose is Menucha. Ba Shabbos, ba Menucha. Maha Olam Chaser. What was the world missing? What was the deficiency at the heart of the world, in spite of the fact that everything seemed to be prepared and ready at hand? What still was that raging desire of the self? What was it missing? It was missing Menucha. It was missing the secret of Menucha. Shabbos is Menucha. Shabbos is stopping to move. And yes, there is rules and regulations set up about how a person moves on Shabbos, but nevertheless, we know Shabbos is not the opposite of movement. So again, just like Gan Eden wasn't the opposite of effort, Shabbos is not the opposite of movement. It's just the revelation that within movement and within effort, we can uncover the deep secret of Menucha, and the two are not at war with one another. We can move and be still at the very same moment. Masha'in came the 6 days of the week, which is the shift on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Erev Shabbos. Each of those days represents its own form of reality. It is a changing, shifting world of changing colors. The Heichal HaGavanim HaMishtanim, the shifts and the ups and the downs and the changes, the tnua, which again, like we said, already implies a breaking up of something that was unified. Something that is unified is resting at place. It's not moving. It's not going anywhere. When something picks itself up, it now has created a distance from where it was and where it is now. And it's the gap between where it was and where it is now that creates the interrelationship between presence and absence, which is the motivating factor and the engine of frictional power that pushes a person out of where they're at to express themselves someplace else. It's that tenua, it's that sha'ashuim, it's that motivational shift from one place to the other that marks the territory of the 6 days of the week. It's the changing colors, it's the heichal tamurim, it's the tamuros, it's this thing was one thing previously and now it means something else entirely. It's the changing reality, the reflection that we have on the relativistic kind of shifts up and down in each and every moment. And it's the chaos of the mind, which it's unending movement here and there, and the anxiety of the motivation of the mind, etc., etc. That is the 6 days of the week. Shabbos is Menucha. The 6 days of the week are the opposite of Menucha. Just as Gan Eden is Menucha, and the outside of Gan Eden is the opposite of Menucha. The secret of Oilamecha Tirah B'chayecha, the secret of learning to experience Menucha, is going to be how do we learn to taste from prior to Gan Eden and prior to the 6 days of the week? How do we learn to draw that light into the 6 days of the week and into the outside of Gan Eden? How do we cultivate Menucha in a world of changes and a world of shifts? Now, Rabbi Nachman, and this is from a couple of Makoros and Chai Maharan, what Rabbi Nassim describes about Rabbi Nachman is that Rabbi Nachman and the name Nechama comes from the same shirish as Menucha, as we're going to see associated with Noach HaTzadik. We're going to go through kind of the Torah and the stories of the Torah to uncover, like we did with the world of anxiety, to uncover the insights that are available to us for trying to cultivate Menucha, that calmness of self, which again, we haven't even begun to try and understand or explain yet. We're going to move through our tzaddikim and through the stories of the Torah to get to that place. But Rabbi Nassan writes about Rabbi Nachman that there was not one day of his life that was lived with Menucha, not one day of his life that was felt with Menucha, because everything about Rabbi Nachman was perpetual movement, perpetual shifts, perpetual change. But at the same point, Rabbi Nassan describes how Rabbi Nachman would tell him over and over again that within the perpetual change and within the perpetual movement, there is still an absolute need to uncover the secret of Menucha and to take a breath and to be mitzamtzim oneself and to sleep and to close the eyes, to enter into that place of non-movement, to enter into that place of stillness within the movement itself. And we see this with the Leshem, we see this with all of the tzaddikim, that ultimately the searching out for menucha, the searching out for calmness of spirit, was not the desire or the attempt to get rid of the opposite of calmness, because this world is the opposite of calmness. This world is a world of distraction. This world is a world of mindlessness. This world is a world of the opposite of attention, which is the beginning of calmness. And so the tzaddikim are not looking to deny reality. They're not looking to get rid of the reality of the fact that our minds are dragged from one place to the other and that we feel a perpetual need to move from one place to the other, whether it be the anxiety of the future or the sadness of the past that is propelling us out of ourselves. That is the nature of the human being, to be no'oneya, to be a product of change and a shifting thing, as the Maharal says, to be a bal shinoi. And shinoi implies a shift and a movement from one place to the other, which takes us out of the notion of menucha, takes us out of that centering element of the groundedness of a shoresh, which is prior to expansion and expression. But the secret that our tzaddikim are giving us access to is, how do I draw menucha? How do I find the chayim of calmness within the chamber of changing colors? How do I draw calmness into the opposite of calmness? How do I first and foremost acknowledge a world that naturally is going to take me out of my position of calmness? And how do I learn to recognize the triggers that will trigger me and take me out of calmness? And how do I learn to create the self-sacrifice necessary to demand calmness in spite of all things? That is the secret of tasting the Or Haganas, of tasting the Menucha at the heart of all things, of understanding how for Rabbi Nachman, on the one hand, he could have never lived a life of Menucha, a day of Menucha, but at the very same moment, there was a demand to uncover the secret of Menucha that rests within the opposite of Menucha itself. It's drawing the light of Gan Eden back into the outside of Gan Eden, revealing the Or Haganuz within the concealment itself. Now, the pasuk that is going to best give us an insight into the beginning stages of trying to find Menucha is the bracha that Yaakov Avinu gives to Yisachar. And we've spoken about this in the past, because Menucha is associated with land. It's associated with a grounding. It's associated with a presence, a calmness, and a sense that I don't need to move anymore. I don't have to run. I don't have to chase. I don't have to go out to get more. I don't have to go out to let go of. I am okay where I am. I am in my shirish. I am me'uchad. There is no need for me to shift anything about myself or anything about my circumstances in order to feel the calmness of spirit, the menucha kitov that exists at the heart of the chai hachayim, at the life of all life, at the chai olamim, at the fount of the Jewish neshama. That is the secret of menucha. And that is the gift that Yaakov Avinu wants to give over to Yisachar. That calmness of spirit, that willingness to realize that I am okay right now. I don't have to move. I don't have to run anywhere. That can also come about because a person can come to terms with realizing that no matter how far I run, and no matter how distant I try and run, nevertheless, I will always feel distant from the goal. And Mamela, the secret of calmness and the secret of sustenance is going to be found specifically in the not moving, in the demand for menucha. And what Yisachar receives, the bracha Yisachar receives, is as follows. V'yar menucha ki toiv v'sa'aretz ki na'ama v'yat shechmo lispol v'hi lamas oived. That Yisachar sees that menucha is good. Yisachar sees that the land is pleasant. And Yisachar girds his shoulders, girds himself to bear the burden of this world. And he prepares to bear the taxing effort of what it means to gain this place of menucha. So the Baal HaSulam immediately kind of focuses on this pasuk as an access point to really reveal a nature of one's relationship with what we truly want in this world. What we want is menucha, what we want is calmness. What a person seeks most desperately is a return back to Shairesh. Any emergence from Shairesh, any complication that comes out from the singular unified root source is complication. It's cheshbonos rabos. It is a shift between me and where I was a moment before, and me and who I am in this moment, and it is the division of self, the divided sky, that creates more and more particular aspects of myself, which is the proliferation of self, which is the birth of complication and multiplicity and noise and confusion, etc., etc. The stiller I am, the more closer to the source of myself I am, the more unchanging my thoughts seem to be, the more mekushar I am to that one thing which is immovable and unchanging, which is the secret of achdus hapashat of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is menucha itself. Chazal tell us, and the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh brings it down, and the Bris Kunas Olam brings it down by Hanukkah, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is referred to as menucha, because the only source of actual absolute menucha is his kashrus to the true menucha, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is unchanging even in the changes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows himself to go go through. But this secret of menucha, this secret of unity of self, this secret of calmness of self that is willing to close the eyes from the need for action and willing to settle down in the moment itself without the demand of addressing where I feel I need to run to, what I feel I need to run from, this is what Yisachar wanted. And it's specifically Yisachar who was able to understand this because Yisachar is the secret of schar. Yisachar is yesh schar. It is the secret of the fact that in this world, in the world of yesh, in the world of thisness and existence, one can experience schar. One can experience the secret of the schar olam haba, which is the secret of menucha. That is why Yisachar demands menucha and is blessed with menucha, because he is the secret of yesh and schar, that there's a schar in yesh itself. Schar mitzvah b'ha'al maleka, that there is no actual reward for a mitzvah in this world, as the tzaddikim describe that there's no room in this world for the schar of a mitzvah, but nevertheless there is the schar of yesh, there is the schar of being, there is the possibility of refining the self to the moment of tasting the sweet taste of menucha kitov in this world. That is the secret of the schar that is nested into this world itself. It's the dvarim that a person can eat from in this world. It is the secret of yesh schar lepulasech, within the pu'ula itself, within the movement, within the pu'ulos hamashtanos, within the chamber of changing colors and activities and ups and downs, there is a schar lepulasech. A person can have that rechush, they can have that same osius as schar, they can have that secret of comfort and calmness. And how does one gain that? It's with the secret of Oy yesh, of loving yesh, that la'asid lavo HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be manchil l'chol tzadik v'tzadik shai olamos, 310 worlds. Shene amar lahanchil oy yesh, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to bestow to the lovers of thisness, to the lovers of existence. What is existence? It's 310. It's the secret of yesh schar, that there's the secret of menucha, which is specifically within the yeshus itself, within the opposite of menucha, that Yisachar wants to experience, specifically Yisachar. And Yaakov Avinu blesses him with this. He blesses him with the pleasantness of the land, the pleasantness of realizing that I could be mechuber to a particular place. But then the end of the pasuk, Baal Sulam says, we find something surprising, that Yisachar sees that menucha is what he wants, that the secret of uncovering the schar of la'asad lava within olam haza itself, of tasting calmness within chaos, of tasting menuchas hanefesh within the tnua hamitchadeshes and the misamedes shel neshama, that there's the calmness and the singularity of stillness that exists within all of the changes of the self. How does one access that? One would expect that Yisachar is going to say, so let me sit and meditate, let me sit and be calm, let me sit and be effortless, let me sit and be still like water. But suddenly the pasuk informs us that that's not what's going to happen. V'yet sichmo lispo, v'yihi l'mas oved, that he girds his shoulders to bear the burden of what it means now to be a human being in this world. That to desire menucha, to want menucha, is to at the very same moment bear ourselves and prepare ourselves to experience what seems to be the opposite of menucha, to be thrown into the world of changes and pu'ulos amishtanos and the chaos of tohu that is metaha the brios, the confusion that clouds and blots out the clarity of the mind on a regular basis, to live in that bilbul and the choshech of Yavan and with the kol hamoina shel romi and the noise and the noise and the movement and the shift. That is the prerequisite, that is the tax that must be paid in order to access the secret of menucha. Menucha in Gan Eden was not the absence of activity. It was the secret of the calmness at the heart of activity. So in order to reach calmness, we do not have to block ourselves off from activity. Rather, we have to draw the light of calmness into activity. So it's specifically in the Viat Sichmo Lispel that I gird my shoulders. The shoulders are the place where the burden rests. The shoulders is the place where we carry the baggage, where we hold all of the memories of the things that have taken us away from Menucha and our desire that has been unsatisfied to return back to menucha, and our attempts to go back to menucha, and our failed attempts to return to menucha. All of that rests on the shoulders. It's the beggar with the big shoulders, the secret of the miyut hamachsika samruba, that little bit, those shoulders that carry so much, the secret of the little bit of oil that allows it to illuminate even further. This is the secret of menucha, that infinite space of menucha, kitov, that secret of the goodness of the Or Haganuz that can rest in the opposite of itself, in the opposite of calmness, in the confusion of it. And Yisachar understands this, that to receive the schar of menucha, I have to prepare myself to experience life that doesn't feel like menucha. That is the first step to uncovering the secret of menucha kitov, that the goodness of menucha. And the Or Chaim HaKadosh on the pasuk over here describes something absolutely incredible. He says that the vayar menucha kitov, what is it that Yisachar was being blessed with? The explanation is that it is the ascendant form of menucha. true calmness. And the Or HaChaim continues and he says, what does true calmness mean? Calmness that is not dependent on anything external. There are calmness forms of experience. There are calming forms of experience, object-oriented experiences, possession-oriented experiences, this worldly experiences, concepts of the mind that prepare me and offer me calmness. But in the end of the day, all of those elements of calmness are contingent. They are dependent upon circumstances outside of themselves. What Yisachar is being blessed with over here is the calmness in and of itself. Just as Shabbos is calmness in and of itself, Shabbos is not just the cessation of activity that leads to menucha. Menucha is the chefza of Shabbos. Menucha is the hisgalus of the possibility of Shabbos, of pausing even within the place where movement seems to still be necessary. It's the secret of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name being menucha, which is not dependent upon anything outside of itself other than the fact that it is. That's the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kavyachol. And that's also the secret of the menucha over here, the menucha Elyona, that is not dependent on an object, because any menucha, any calmness, any focus of mind that is dependent on an externalized object, when that externalized object or that externalized experience or emotion or love or feeling is not there, then batal hadavar, then that connection to calmness falls away. And that's still a calmness that is found only in the outside of Gan Eden. That's where some moments I'm calm, some moments I'm not calm. But to access the point of calmness of Gan Eden, of the menucha kitov, it has to be a calmness that is independent of all external circumstances. This is a calmness of acceptance. It is an acceptance-based calmness where I look at what is and I find everything that I possibly need within it. I need not go anywhere in order to access what I feel that I need. That calmness is an absolute form of calmness. That calmness is the calmness of a Kadosh Baruch Hu Kavyachol. That's the calmness that Yisachar wants. And in order to access that non-contingent form of calmness, that absolute form of calmness, which is a unity that exists in spite of all of the changes that operate and cover it over, that the Or HaGanuz continues to perpetually pulsate within the very foundations of shift and change and darkness in this world, that's the V'yat Shechmo Lispol. That's the Savlanut. That demands patience, that demands a willingness to bear the burden. Just as HaKadosh Baruch Hu is referred to as Soivel Kol Almin, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tolerates all worlds, so too we tolerate all things. And tolerance is the secret of menucha that exists within what appears to be intolerable. The opposite of menucha is intolerable to the neshama. The neshama comes from a place of menucha, comes from a place prior to change, and any shifts and any change feels intolerable to it. The secret of tolerance is the secret of uncovering a menucha and a willingness to persevere in spite of the fact that the external circumstances are no longer providing me with the prerequisite experience that I feel I need to function. The sevila, to be soivel something, to be soivel means to bend in accordance with what the external circumstances are and to uncover the secret possibility of acceptance of all things that rests within whatever circumstances they are. Not because I'm adaptable, but because the secret of menucha is one that transcends and exists beneath any possibility of change. It's ever accessible when I access that point of menucha in my life, but it comes only about through the sevila, through the tolerance of this world. And so what we're going to find, like anything else, that in order to uncover the secret of calmness, of menuchas hanefesh, of menuchas haguf, of menuchas halev, of menuchas hasechel, of menuchas habayis, of menucha v'simcha, and the menucha of Shabbos, and the menucha kitov, that secret of calmness that we need in order to survive. A person can't survive within a world of changes without accessing the Even HaShasiyah of menucha, that the yesh schar, that there's a schar, l'pu'lasech, that there's a secret of calmness and unity that exists at the heart of all of the change and the shifts that I undergo. To go through this process, to find that menucha, one first has to traverse the path of what Rabbi Nassan said about Rabbi Nachman, that at first glance it appears that he had no menucha. This is what Yaakov Avinu desires. HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals a deep secret to Yaakov Avinu in the parshios of this time, that Bikesh Yaakov Leshev B'Shalva. Yaakov also wants to sit with Menucha. Shalva is a different experience of Menucha, but nevertheless it is oriented towards a pre-experience of being kicked out of Gan Eden, tasting Olam Haba in Olam Haza, that secret of Achen Yesh Elokim B'Makom Hazeh V'Ani Lo Yadati, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu exists here in this world as well, and I didn't know it was possible to taste Olam Haba and Olam Haza. It's the secret of Yaakov and Yisrael. Yaakov wanted to sit B'Shalva, And miyad kufza alav rugza de Yosef, immediately the rage or the intensity of the experience of Yosef, the opposite of menucha, the shifts and the changes and the displacement and the back and the forth and the up and the down and the gullus and the exile and the buttoning and the unbuttoning and the closing and the opening and all of the various shifts and turns and the tumuros that we go through that take us out of menucha, that is what Yaakov Avinu is responded with. He desired calmness, he desired tranquility, he desired non-movement, and suddenly he was met with absolute movement, absolute change. And Avada, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not being punitive. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not punishing the Bechir Shabbat. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not tantalizing Yaakov Avinu with the secret of calmness and then ripping it out of his hands, God forbid. But rather, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like we see always, is revealing to the tzaddik what he truly wants. You want shalva, if you want the secret of calmness, this is how you'll find it, through the rugza of Yosef. Just as you want menucha v'yatzich molispo, prepare yourself to tolerate the burden of working towards calmness. Calmness is not a state that one finds themselves in. Calmness is a state that is cultivated and one makes a decision to be calm. Just as the secret of Shabbos is a vision of ki'ilu kol melachtecha asuya, as if all of your work is done, that there's a chiyuv of seeing myself as if I have nothing to do, in spite of the fact that the sense of having something to do continues to rage in my mind. It's my ability to apply self-control and limitation to that movement of the self by placing a calmness upon the movement of the self, or revealing the calmness that exists at the heart of the movement of the self. But it is a decision that is made. It is a savlanut. It demands patience and a tolerance. And that's the secret of Yaakov and Yosef, that Yaakov wants shalva. He wants it. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, here, I'm going to give you your access point to shalva, the rugza de Yosef. What's rugza? Rugza, as we're going to see, the enemy of calmness is going to be frustration, resentment, the territory of anger, the territory of roiges, the territory of the things that rub up against what we feel we need for ourselves and the circumstances that we feel we need in order to operate optimally in this world or to function on any level in this world. Anytime those circumstances are taken away from us by things outside of our control, and everything is out of our control, the emotional flare-up is one of anger and frustration, because what anger and frustration ultimately are an attempt to regain control over any given situation where I feel that my semblance of minimal control has been taken away from me. And so anytime I feel that loss of control again, the anxiety, falling feeling of loss of control is responded to with a desire to reorient myself and take control over again. And when I'm trying to take control and grasp for control, when I realize I have no control, I'll speak louder, I'll yell louder, I'll clench louder, harder. Each and every person expresses themselves with more intensity. Anger is perpetually an attempt to find a lost ability to be calm because the circumstances have changed against me, or another person has caused the circumstances to change against me. So the antidote to anger and the opposite of calmness is the antidote to anger is calmness, and anger is the opposite of calmness. That in order to find the secret of finding that secret of menucha at the heart of change, we're going to have to learn how to be mamtik anger. We're going to learn how to be mamtik charon af, how to be mamtik that rugza de Yosef. And we saw this with the Rebbe of Baruch, the Heilige Rebbe of Baruch of Mezhebush. He was a tzaddik who was known as the Gevura Shebechesed. There was a rugza to him. There was a force to him. There was a fierceness to him. There was a sense of urgency. There was a sense of minding the divisions and the gaps and the gevura between one thing and another, and ensuring a steadfast attendance to those distinctions, the gevura aspect of self. And when a person would come to the Rebbe of Baruch, the Rebbe of Baruch would yell, the Rebbe of Baruch would scream. But ultimately, this is how he was Palel Yeshuos, and on his deathbed, the Rebbe of Baruch had his hand open on the Zohar HaKadosh, which was the vitality of the Rebbe of Baruch, was the Zohar HaKadosh, the calmness of the Zohar, and he had his finger on the place in the Zohar HaKadosh where it says, Is rugzad ikr Baruch. There is an anger, there is a fierceness, there is a rage that is the source of blessing. And what that means for our purposes is we're going to see that it's specifically in the savlanus of Yisachar that we're going to uncover the secret of calmness. It's specifically within the rugzad de Yosef that we're going to be able to uncover the shalva hapnimi, the secret of calmness that we're going to be aiming for. Just to map it onto the territory of Pnimius HaTorah and what we'll be discussing, when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's revelation in the world, the first point, the interface, and really one of the most fundamental expressions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the secret of Keser, is the parts of Atik Yomin and Arach Anpin, or the secret of Keser. Now, Keser, because it rests at the top of the lower world, it also is rooted to the bottom of the higher world. Like any new beginning, it comes from some other beginning's end, and the bottom, the Malchus of the previous world, the Ani of the previous world, the lowest part of the higher world, becomes the highest part of the lower world which becomes the ayin. That's the secret of ani and ayin. That ani is the malchus of the higher world, and ayin is the keser of the lower world. So what we see is that every keser is a mamutza. It is a transitionary space, which by definition contains the properties of both stages of that transition within itself. There is the end of the beginning and the beginning of the end, the lowest point of the higher and the highest point of the lower, the finite expression that existed within infinity and infinity that exists within finitude. These two elements of Keser, this bridge that bonds the two worlds of prior to Gan Eden and after Gan Eden, of prior to creation and after creation, is referred to as Atik Yoimin and Arach Anpin. The parts of Keser is composed of these two parts. Atik Yoimin, which implies a certain ancientness and a sense of removal, represents that which is removed from conscious grasp because it is oriented towards the world prior to us, to that point of conscious awareness that rests outside of my capacity of grasp, which is the secret of the Malchus of the higher world, which is the secret of Atik Yoimin, of an ancientness. And ancientness implies a knowledge of it, but an ingraspability of that thing that I know about. It is something that beckons my imagination back to a place prior to conscious awareness, in spite of the fact that in the dreamscape of the mind, I am aware deeply that I'm aware of it. That's the secret of Sipori Maisios Mishanim Kadmonios, that Rabbi Nachman Sipori Maisios were orienting the self back to those pre-memory memories, that place that we know we come from in spite of the fact that we have no access to that place. Those secret of Shanim Kadmonios, of Atik Yoimin, of the ancient days. That's the secret of the Malchus of the higher world, and that's the highest level of Keser. The next level of Keser, the lower level of Keser, which is the highest level of the lower world, which is the ayin of the lower world, which is the beginningness of something that is graspable to me in spite of the fact that it's in the form of a Keser, that's referred to as Arich Anpin. So we have two elements of Keser. We have Atik Yoimin and Arich Anpin. And the highest part of Keser is Atik Yoimin, and the lower part of Keser is Arich Anpin. Now, in Hasidus, these two expressions and these two places represent two modalities of self, two experiences with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world. What are the modes? What are the psychological modes that are emergent from that place of Keser? The highest part of Keser, the Atik Yoimin, which is the Malchus of the higher world, which is the Ani of the higher world, is oriented towards Tainug, towards pleasure. The most fundamental expression of Menucha within the self is the pleasure of being, not a pleasure associated with an externalized object, as the Baal Tanya explains very clearly when it comes to Hanukkah, but rather a pleasure, a Tainug, a pleasure of self, a pleasure of existence. It is a non-sensual pleasure. It is not necessarily a pleasure that is felt. It is a tainug hane'elam. It is a tainug habilti morgash. It's not sensually felt. It's not a dopamine-induced pleasure, which leads us to all sorts of problems when we associate the two of them together. But it is a pleasure of self within self. It is a pleasure that rests beneath the space of consciousness that animates every aspect of the person's experience and breathes a calmness of presence and acceptance of all things and an unchangingness and an unmovement into the person's experience. Then you have Arich Anpin. Arich Anpin, which is the lower part of Keser, which is the highest part of the next world, the ayin of the next world, which transitions from the ani or the malchus of the higher world. That's the secret of ratzon, of desire. Desire, yearning, the cultivation of movement, the need to be better and better, not because I'm not good enough, but because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinitely good, and I want to climb closer and closer. It is the motivational space of desire, which is emergent from that inner place of pleasure. And as the Rebbe Rashab describes, that yes, a person only wants something that is pleasurable and takes pleasure from what they want, but at the core of it, it is the essential nature of that unfelt pleasure that is in truth the bedrock upon which our desires and our will is born. But as Kabbalah Sa'arizal undergoes the intervention, Kavyachol, or the further expression of what the Rashash is revealing, we see a shift. In the world of the Arizal, on an external level, we view things in a gradational level, in a hierarchical level, that above is above and below is below. So if Atik Yoimin is above Arich Anpin, and the end of the higher world is higher than the beginning of the new world, so then pleasure exists above Ratzon. Atik exists above Arich Anpin, and therefore they're two separate categories. But from a proper understanding of the Arizal through the three-dimensionality of what the Rashash introduces us to, we understand the secret of Halbasha Ba'oivi, that it is a three-dimensional engarment, that the transition between one thing and another is not a hierarchical distance between above and below. Yes, that exists, and it continues to exist in the secret of linearity, but in truth, the distinction can also be seen from a depth perspective, where we're now dealing with an inside and an outside. And one level engarbs and externalizes the level that precedes it, just as a garment expresses the inner content of a self by covering over it. So the secret of Habasha is the next level which comes and engarbs itself, surrounding and drawing vitality from the previous level that exists within it, like a garment covers over a body, kavyachol. And so we see that instead of looking at Atik Yomin and Arich Anpin as this hierarchical pattern of above and below, we can now see it as a three-dimensional nested system where Atik Yomin exists in the inner interiority of the self, and Mulubish on top of Atik Yomin is the secret of Arich Anpin, so that we're not talking about a desire and then a will or a ratzon, or that we're not talking about pleasure and calmness that then descends down into movement and the desire for shifting, but rather we're talking about an Atik that exists engarbed within Arich Anpin at every moment, meaning that the secret of calmness and pleasure, which is the tainug, which takes place when a person is makusher to the shayresh, of tasting Gan Eden mamish, of living that calmness and that central positioning of not needing to move, that exists in the inner interiority of the experience of Arich Anpin, meaning to say that within the desire itself, within the change itself, the desire, Arich Anpin, is the secret of savlanus. It's the need to tolerate. It's the need to experience the rugza de Yosef, the shifts and the changes in this world, the 6 days of the week, the outside of Gan Eden, all of those places that appear to be after creation, that place where the ore is now nignaz. But the truth is that hidden within it and buried within it is the secret of Atik Yomin, is the secret of the presentness and the need to not move anywhere, and the need to find the secret of pleasure and calmness of self and presence to self and presence to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the secret of Hashra'ah. And what the Rebbe describes, Rav Yitzchak Shlita describes, that these two experiences, this movement and motivational attempt to shift who I am in each and every moment and to conquer more, which is oriented with Arich Anpin, that's the experience of outside Gan Eden. That's Yigia, that's Tenua, that's movement, that's the opposite of Menucha. That's the desire for a person to run as hard as they can to accomplish what they feel they need to accomplish. And if I don't run as hard as I can to accomplish what I need to accomplish, I'm never going to accomplish it. But at the very heart of that experience, says the Rebbe, a person needs to access the secret of Atik, which is that even in my desire to accomplish, I know I have nothing to accomplish. I've already accomplished. Natzachti v'anatzeach, gamarti v'egmor. I've completed and I will complete. Everything that needs to be completed is completed already, because at the Shorish HaDevarim, everything is always already rooted in the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And a person has to have the intense desire to move and grow and catch that bus that they're running to catch, but at the very same moment they have to be aware that in the inner interiority of that space of the opposite of calmness rests the abundant hashra'ah and presence of the calmness and pleasure, which is that I'm already on the bus. There's nowhere to run to. I don't have to run, but I still have to run. So it's about drawing the secret of I don't have to run into the ability to still run, which is the secret of calmness within movement and movement within calmness, which is what we're going to try and cultivate throughout these classes. Be'ezras Hashem, most of the classes will be focused on particular psychological postures, triggers towards the opposite of calmness, methods of cultivating calmness. And be'emes, everything we're going to say is a tefillah ba'alma. It's all b'derech tefillah of begging HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give us menucha, begging HaKadosh Baruch Hu to draw us closer to a zman of menucha muchletes, of the giloy, of the menucha hasharashi, which is the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the ability to taste the menucha satira, and the ability to live with the hakara of the Or Haganuz that blazes in our minds, which reveals the secret of the river of Gan Eden that floats into our experience, giving us a taste of Mashiach Tzidkenu in the present, even prior to his arrival. May it be soon, Be'ezras Hashem.